Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores with a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am so happy to be with you today. Every week, I team up with my friend and fellow author, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, to take you across North America, visiting independent bookstores that hold communities together and speaking with the authors who love them. And today, we are in Kansas City with Rainy Day Books, bookseller Jeffrey Jennings, and author Adib Khorram. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. For anybody who doesn't know, Adib Khorram is the author of a number of books. Darius the Great is Not Okay earned the William C. Morris Debut Award, the Asian Pacific American Award for Young Adult Literature, and a Boston Globe Horn Book Honor, as well as a multitude of other honors and accolades. His follow-up, Darius the Great Deserves Better, received 3-star reviews, was an indie bestseller, and received a Stonewall honor. His debut picture book, Seven Special Somethings, was released this year in 2021. Fabulous. Adib, I'm going to come to you first. We are here with Rainy Day Books and with Jeffrey because you nominated them as your beloved indie bookstore. And I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about why and what it is that makes them so special.
For sure. I've basically lived in Kansas City most of my life. I lived away to go to school when I was in my youth. But Rainy Day Books has really been an institution in Kansas City for, since 1975, I think. Since before I was born, at least. And, you know, I remember growing up, my parents weren't really, I love them to death, they weren't really like literature people or really book people. And so the library or like the B. Dalton booksellers at the mall was about as far as I made it as a child. But once I was able to drive, I just kind of fell in love with Rainy Day Books and the events that they were doing, the great selection they had, and the lovely booksellers there. And then when my life took a turn and I ended up becoming an author accidentally, they've been so welcoming and supportive of me and my career. And so I just love them to death and wanted to highlight them for this talk.
Love it. That's fabulous. And, you know, Jeffrey, I oftentimes will ask people how they became booksellers, how they came by that. I believe in your case, it is a family business, but tell us a little bit about it.
I basically was almost born into it. My mother founded the store in November of 1975. It was originally just a used paperback exchange store in a little tiny, barely like 600 square foot space that was the old city jail and police station. And then within a year in the same shopping center, she started carrying new books, and things really took off from there. Trying to think, I guess it was 1998, we moved down to the corner and became an anchor store in the center that we're in, and we've been there ever since, just going gangbusters. Really started doing author events in the 80s and on into the 90s. And it was really the mid 90s where the scale and the number of author events that we were doing started to take off. We started to go off-site quite a bit. And the store now is, I would say, very well known internationally for the author events that we do, the live author events that we do, and boy, we sure have a lot of stories that we could talk about those live events.
Well, I mean, we'd love to. I mean, I believe the Publishers Weekly said that Rainy Day Books is, I think, one of the preeminent independent bookstores for author events in the country. And I mean, tell us a little bit about it. I mean, I'd be curious about a couple of things. I mean, first is, how did the author events scale up to the degree that they have for you? And second, I wonder if there are one or two that stick in your mind as kind of extraordinary, even for Rainy Day.
How did this scale up? So part of that was, you know, a store can only be so big. and the comfort factor for the audience can only be so big in a store environment. And so in the mid 90s and around the turn of the millennium, it's scary to say that, we started looking for offsite venues that would hold significant numbers of people, 1,000 plus. Part of that was to give us some flexibility where we wouldn't be able to, because we couldn't predict how big the crowd would get, and we didn't want to turn anybody away. And we started doing events with authors that were like, it was a once in a lifetime thing to do something with that author. And so we wanted the maximum size that we could get to accommodate the largest crowd. I mean, it was going to be a one-time thing. So that's essentially how we scaled it up. The other thing we did very early on in the very early 2000s and almost entirely by 2005 is we started charging for events, and the admission package for the event was purchasing the book. And we did it initially for most events that we did. You purchased a copy of the book and you got 2 tickets to come to the event. So parent, child, a couple, date night, I mean, however you wanted to characterize it, we saw that as being part of the fabric of creating an event and an experience, a once in a lifetime experience. And that served us well. A lot of our colleagues weren't wild about it when we started doing it, but now, particularly when you're talking about something that's scaled up, it makes sense for both the bookstore and the publisher, and definitely the author, to get the sales at an event. The 2 that I can give you that were very memorable to me, very personal to me because of the connection to both the author and the material. One was we hosted John Krakauer when Into Thin Air was first released in hardcover. We were one of the very first events on his tour. And a lot of the events that we do offsite, we do at a non-denominational church called Unity Temple on the Plaza, which seats 1,250. And for that event, the demand to see that event was so great that we wound up, we try not to ever oversell an event by any stretch of the imagination, but we had so many people that wanted to get in that we wound up selling additional admission packages, and we had people seated in the aisles, and we had people, I mean, like every available floor space, people were standing lined up along the back wall. Our estimate on the crowd size was pushing 1,400, which was so large actually that it drew the attention of the fire marshal in Kansas City, Missouri. And he showed up while we were wrangling, just about getting ready to get started with John. And we explained to him what the deal was, that, what the book was, what the material was. And so he actually went in, the fire marshal, along with, I guess, a couple of his deputies, they went in as the program was starting. And John began telling his story, and he was telling his story along with a slideshow. This is, how far back we're talking. And I was hustling, as one does when you're working on something that scale. But I also had the opportunity to hear like 95% of John's presentation. And when John finished, you could have heard a pin drop because the audience was stunned. They had never heard anything or seen anything like that. And to have it be presented by the very person who was there,
right,
with pictures taken by his own hand, even the fire marshal stuck around at the end to get an autographed book from John.
Oh my God.
And told us that it would, we would never do something like that again, that we would have to restrict the size of the crowd. But as far as he was concerned, nothing bad happened that night. So that's one.
Wow, that's something.
But another one that I can tell you where it comes down to making it an event. I mean, the only reason that we do an author event is if we think that the author is going to have a good time, that the audience is going to have a good time, and then last, we want to have a good time. And they're like three legs of a tripod. So if we have all that going in, then we know that we can do something special and we can make it special. We had an opportunity to host John Irving, and we had hosted John before. And my mother has met John a number of times. I'd met him. I never had any extended conversations with him. But we had an opportunity for him when his book Last Night in Twisted River came out. And he actually came in the day before, and I wound up picking him up from the airport and hanging out with him for the afternoon, which was its own surreal experience for someone like me. But to me, he was just a guy. I mean, we've hosted all kinds of people, and to me, authors are authors. They're not. Sometimes they come with entourages and baggage, but it's just someone trying to tell a story, and we're trying to help tell that story. So John had dislocated his finger wrestling 2 days prior.
Of course he did.
And despite this, he agreed to autograph all of the books for the people who were attending in private, because that was the most expeditious way to do it. And I sat in the basement store and helped John sign all of these books, with a blue pen, and listen to stories about wrestling and about the origins of some of his books, and also his writing process. And John explained this, behind the scenes, that he writes all of his books longhand. So he writes them all longhand on a pad. He doesn't use a computer or a typewriter. He writes them out longhand on a pad, and that the injuries and all of that was kind of taking its toll, and that this was probably going to be the last time that he would be signing books was on this tour, because his physician had told him, you got a choice here. If you want to keep writing longhand, you've got to stop doing the other thing.
Right.
So with that in mind, we felt like this was going to be a very special event for our customers, right? Because they were going to get their signed John Irving books, and then, John Irving would come out and talk for about an hour, answer a few questions, and that would be it. So John Irving came out for the event. It was just John talking to the audience. And he was talking, and he was talking, and he was talking, and he had a pretty good rapport with the audience, but he already had this kind of rapport with us, and just kind of felt special in the space. And I, of course, am like, we're always trying to keep an eye on time, because there are publicists and agents and all kinds of people who want us to, limit what the authors can do. But if the author is rolling, it's not for us to give them the hook.
Right.
So as it rolled up on 2 hours, I stood in the back with my mother and my stepdad and the staff, and we were just stunned, because the stories that he was telling, it was everything that anybody who's a John Irving fan would ever want to know.
Right.
Things that he had never told before, about GARP, about Cider House Rules, just for a John Irving fan, just for a fan of fiction, just all of the revelations into all of his works, independent of the book that they had come there to hear about. And finally, at about 10 after 9, his former assistant was actually sitting in the front row, and they're supposed to go to dinner. Finally, at about 10 after 9, he caught eyes with her, and she was just like everybody else in the crowd, just enraptured, just absolutely enraptured. And he said, this has been wonderful, but I have to go. Thank you very much. And he went right off the stage and right out the back door.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And that was an event. It was not recorded. You had to be there to experience it. And for the people who were there to experience it, it was something that was, almost indescribable. For weeks, for years, people have come into the store and talked about the events that they've been to. They came to it as they came to parties as kids.
Yeah.
You know, things that we did. They came and saw. They finally were able to see, you know, to get this close to an author that they had followed for their entire career.
I love it. I mean,
just a magical experience.
Yeah, I mean, those are incredible stories. I love that. Adib, I want to come to you with a question about events, but first, I just want to pause and remind the online audience and also the future audience viewing this recording that the reason that we're here listening to these unbelievable stories is that we want you to go to Rainy Day Books online and pick up some books. Pick up some John Irving, pick up some Adib Khorram. Let me come to you. I would love to talk to you also about author events. You sort of buried in your initial comments that you accidentally became an author, which I think is such a funny way of describing it. And I know that you have an interesting background, that you are an artist as well as an author. I'd love it if you'd say a little bit about that origin story and what it is like for you when you're able to go out sort of on the road and do author events and meet the public and what that's like for you.
For sure. So I actually got my degree in theatrical lighting design because, like many young queer people do, I found the theater in high school and was convinced that that was the future for me. Yep. Spoiler alert, it was not the future for me. I didn't really have the temperament to make a go at like being a theater professional. And I finished college right when the big recession hit in 2007, 2008. So it was really hard to find a job. And so I ended up finding a job at a production company here in Kansas City that did mostly like lighting and sound and video for corporate events. And then they found out I knew how to use Microsoft PowerPoint. And so suddenly I became the person that was in charge of like fixing corporate PowerPoints to like get projected at events. And that ended up coming with a lot of downtime as I would, hurry up and wait for client emails and stuff. And so I just kind of started writing for fun while I was sitting in my office waiting for emails. And, I had written a few plays as part of my education. I went to film school for 1 year before finding out that that was an even worse thing for me than theater was. But I loved trying to write screenplays. But the fun thing about writing books is that you really don't need to know anyone to make a book happen the way that you do with like a movie or a play. And so I just started writing, and I wrote a lot of really, really bad books that no one will ever see because they were just awful. And then slowly got better at it and eventually did write something that got me an agent and then ended up selling. And so that's why I say I accidentally became an author, because it still feels a little surreal that it worked out that way. And then when the pandemic hit and, events with humans were no longer a thing, I got laid off from my my day job. But I'm still writing full time now. So writing ended up being the more stable occupation in the mild apocalypse, which, was a great surprise to my parents for sure, who were like, how are you going to support yourself as an artist? Surprise. And so, writing for young adults and for children, getting out and meeting your readers is a really kind of crucial part of it. I think most creators of books for children aren't it because they actually do care about young people and want to be of service, and I certainly do. And so I used to do a lot of school visits, festivals, conferences, and there was nothing really quite like getting to interact with your readers, especially young ones who are much more excited to meet a real author and be much less filtered. So I've gotten some really fun and amusing interactions with them, including a middle schooler who once just asked me why my head was so shiny. And I was like, well, that's just male pattern baldness. Maybe one day you'll find out about that. But yeah, it's a really, writing is a very lonely profession. And for me as an author, doing events is one of the ways of counteracting that loneliness, because I then get to see the people whose lives I'm touching with my work. And that's really rewarding and exciting. And, it's been great the way that so many places have been able to pivot toward virtual events. Rainy Day has now hosted 2 of my virtual events. But it's still not quite the same as getting to be in a room with a bunch of people who are excited to read your book. And so I just fingers crossed that we'll one day get to do that again.
Absolutely.
We're gonna do it for Kiss and Tell. Don't worry.
I'm not worried. I'm just saying, what if there's another mutant virus and then they're like, no, shut it down again?
I think we'll be okay by the time Kiss and Tell rolls around. And I mean, Adib, I mean, you sort of touched on this, but wouldn't you agree that in particular the stuff that you write, especially in the issues in YA, I mean, not just in what you write, but in YA in general, don't you think that being able to remove this curtain and actually connect with to connect with a young reader is much more powerful in person?
Absolutely. When you're on a screen, you're not really that different than any of the other teachers that they've been in Zoom class with for the last 8 hours of the day.
Right.
But getting to be in person, you get to bring a different energy to it and make it, as you said, an event, make it a once in a lifetime thing for them that they're going to remember and be inspired by, hopefully, or be mortified by if it's terrible.
One way or the other.
No one's as mortified as me if it goes badly.
Oh, jeez. Adib, I have a question for you. I'm going to put this question out to you, and then Jeffrey, I'm going to come to you for your opinion on it. Many of the people who watch this program are themselves aspiring writers, and there's sort of the perennial question of why. Frankly, why are some books commercially successful and others are not? Why do some books catch imagination and others sink? Darius the Great has been tremendously successful. It's a pair of books and a character, I think, who have really caught readers' imagination and affection. And to some degree, I guess we just don't know. I mean, there's just sort of something ineffable about it. But I mean, Adib, do you have any idea sort of why, what it is that makes a particular book, a particular character just stick to the wall when so many others kind of go sliding off?
I mean, I do have a lot of theories. The fact of the matter is, one of the things that can make it happen is money, marketing budget. The more ads you place for things, the more it's in people's conscious and the more they will seek it out. But no one's ever really guaranteed that. And there's never any guarantee that it's going to work because if anyone knew how to make books be successful, all books would be successful.
Sure.
And so a part of it is, I do think honesty, people connect with honesty. I think part of it is just being in the right place at the right time. And a tremendous part of it is human connection, connecting with booksellers who are going to be excited about your book. That'll then push your book on other people. In the children's space, connecting with librarians and teachers as well, because they're often the ones that are connecting readers with books. I think one of the most exciting success stories I can think of in recent years is a series of adult sci-fi novellas called The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, who I was introduced to those books by Jerry, one of the booksellers at Rainy Day Books, and just fell in love with them. And then I started recommending them to everyone that I knew, and then they started recommending them to everyone. And so it's really, you just, if you find one champion and it's the right champion, it's just going to spread. And with Murderbot Diaries in particular, Martha Wells had written something that captured a lot of champions because there were a lot of booksellers that were excited about it. And so she had been writing for, I think, 20 or 30 years. But the Murderbot Diaries was like an explosive success for her, enough that it was like getting attention and kind of an overwhelming amount of it. And she's like, well, what do I do now? This book is like really successful. And so I think that really goes to show how, at the end of the day, word of mouth is still the number one way of making people pick up a book, is a recommendation from someone they trust.
Yeah.
And I don't know, until we find a way to make it so that all humans can read all the books all the time, I think a lot of it is just going to be dependent on luck and taste and good relationships.
Absolutely. To the audience, Murderbot Diaries can be purchased from Rainy Day Books using the link in your chat. Jeffrey, you're on the, obviously sort of on the retail side of things. You see customers coming into the store, picking one book over another. I am always curious as to what degree booksellers can act as tastemakers versus to what degree you're sort of riding a wave that everybody else is riding. What do you think? What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I can only speak to, booksellers. There are people who work in bookstores and they're booksellers. There are great booksellers at the chains. There are great booksellers at the mass retailers. So, but book people tend to gravitate towards one another. Certainly, our clientele over the years, our core clientele, they want to talk about books. They want to come in and they want to talk about books, and they want to talk about books that they've read, and they want to talk about books that they should know about. And it's in that kind of discovery phase where we can sell a book like Adib's. Adib's book is easy to sell because, first of all, it's got an original main character. I'm talking about Darius, obviously. It's got an original main character, but that character is so unbelievably authentic and relatable, right? That it's an easy thing to hand to a young reader and say, there is something for you in this book. It's not wrapped in corporate cloth, so to speak. It wasn't created by a focus group. It was created by a human being who put a lot of soul into the story, and we can pick up on that. If there's anything that I've said repeatedly in the store to customers explicitly, it's that we don't have an incentive to sell you a bad book. And I can sit and make book recommendations to somebody all day long. I've been reading. I grew up in the back of the bookstore. The store's been in business for 46 years. I've got an awful lot of backlist to summon to throw at somebody. But we're always recommending something that we're trying to click with the reader and say, well, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? Sometimes the reader can say, well, I like this, I like this, I like this. And we may give them something that's completely different. Say, well, this sounds unusual, but have you ever heard of a book called the Murderbot Diaries? And they'll be like, well, no, what's that? And then as we start to explain the story of the author, the story of the book, people get curious. And they may pick up something that's, in the case of the Murderbot Diaries, there is a lot of crossover to people who perhaps would never read something like that, but they were just sort of like, what is this? What is it? Why are people talking about this? But there's a palpable discovery that takes place. There's curation that takes place in an independent bookstore. And at the end of the day, for every bookseller, wherever they're selling, there's a decision to champion something. It's a lot more fun. I will tell you straight out. I've met a lot of people who have sold millions and millions of books, and most of them are very nice people. But it's so much more fun as an independent bookseller to find something new, to find something maybe that somebody or only a small group of people are talking about, and read it and discover it and begin to start the conversation. Again, this is something a lot of independent booksellers will say. It's not our intention to sell every book that's out there. It's not our intention to sell every book in the marketplace. We're just trying to start a conversation about books.
Jeffrey, you mentioned, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, and that conversation is most effective when you're actually on the sales floor, where you can look someone in the eye. Yeah. Because just like with book selling, just like with books, you can't fake authenticity. right? I mean, if you're reading something, particularly a seasoned bookseller can pick up very quickly whether something is cribbing from another work, right? This is, well, if you liked this book that had girl in the title, this book also has girl in the title, but it's an original story, we assure you.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's really just about building that authentic connection with the customer, and we love to do it.
Absolutely. You mentioned, Jeffrey, you talked about Darius the Great as an easy sell, and I agree with you, because people just sort of fall in love with that character. But what makes a book a hard sell? Is it an esoteric topic? Is it sort of difficult subject matter? What makes it sort of hard to sell a book, or to move a book, or to persuade people to pick up a book? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, two. One is, obviously we have to be careful. It's more tricky with fiction. Comes up a lot more in fiction. We have to be tricky with knowing the breadth and depth of all the issues that are inside of a book. I won't get too specific, but if there are issues like for instance, for young adults, it's not that they shouldn't read it. It's just we need to know that it's in there. If there are scenes with self-harm, if there are scenes with abuse, right? Things that are tough and that are authentic and that are real. We need to know these are there. And this applies to adult fiction too. We just need to know that they're there in the story, because sometimes the people that we're recommending these books to are experiencing that, and we're just sensitive to our crowd. So if there are plot elements, again, I'm just talking about fiction. If there are plot elements that we think might be triggering or challenging for the reader, we try to feel our booksellers are kind of trained to kind of feel people out. Our store is located right across the street from the University of Kansas Cancer Center. So end of life and celebrating each moment. Those are, that's a chunk of our clientele right there. So we're sensitive to that.
Right.
So that's one thing that can be challenging. The other thing that be challenging, and Dave was kind of hinting at it a little bit, is we're wary of something that's oversold. So if they send out 10,000 galleys and they're spending $2 million on such and such, or their selling point is that they paid $2 million for it,
Right.
Our antenna go up. And I'm not the only one, and our store does it, lots of other stores do it. We can be wary, because that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great book that's going to hit. That just means that the publishing industry has placed a very large bet on it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it gets by, and sometimes it's an abysmal failure. And we just try to be as neutral as possible. If we like it, we like it, and we sell it. But just because there are full-page ads for it running in traditional media or online, that's not necessarily okay. We're going to put this up front in our store. What are our customers asking for, right? If they're asking for it, they're asking for it. But
that's interesting. That's very interesting. Adib, we've got an audience question for you. We're talking a lot about Darius, as one will when you have a very successful title. So, question about Kiss and Tell, and in particular, if you can tell us a little bit about what that book, what to expect.
Yeah, for sure. Let me get my visual aid.
Yeah.
So this is Kiss and Tell. It's supposed to come out.
Is that the final cover?
This is I think there might be a blurb on it or something. We're still waiting. This is still the galley.
But that's the final cover. I haven't seen the final cover yet.
I have one to drop off at the store next time I'm in.
Oh, great.
Pick up books, by the way.
Peggy. Yeah.
So Kiss and Tell is the story of an out gay member of a hit Canadian boy band named Hunter, who is dealing with a really messy public breakup with his ex. while at the same time he's on his like a big major tour with his band and grappling with the pressures of fame and success and what it means to be queer in the spotlight and how to use his platform for good. It's really funny and fun, and I think has a really good romance it's like a rebound romance between Hunter and basically a character that's analogous to like an Iranian Nick Jonas from an Iranian Jonas Brothers. And it's full of lots of like fake BuzzFeed quizzes that I invented and lyrics that I wrote for songs. And I'm really proud of it. And it's supposed to come out in March, and fingers crossed that it'll get printed in time and shipped in time. And that supply chains will be resolved by the spring. But I'm really, really proud of it. I started working on it like 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And so it really is my pandemic baby. And there were some really, really hard days of working on a book and being creative during the lockdowns. But I survived, and I'm really happy with how it came out.
I love it. I can't wait to read it. You bring up supply chain issues, and I just want to remind our audience something we've been talking about in recent weeks is that now is the time to be doing your holiday shopping. It is mid-October, but the time is now. I'd love to get some book recs from the two of you. I want to remind the audience that the place to be doing your shopping this week, at least, is Rainy Day Books. The link is in the chat. Click through, order a bunch of holiday books. Jeffrey, I'm going to come to you first. What can you recommend? What have you been reading, or what's coming out very soon that you're feeling excited about?
Reading. Hang on, I'm going to look at a stack of stuff here. I keep my piles off camera.
Oh, I keep the chaos piles off camera. This is relatively sorted.
So this just came out. Fantastic.
Ooh.
Ordain, definitive oral biography. Just a wonderful look at a man who I had the good fortune to meet, and unfortunately left us far too soon. But very well presented look, and it's interviews with just dozens and dozens of people who knew him. And if anybody's really interested in who he really was and how he became this sort of cultural icon that he was, they absolutely would love it. Beyond that, this, of course, needs no introduction.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest novel in the country right now. Truly one of the most inventive authors that is writing today for fiction. Not surprising, the accolades that it's getting. It's an inventive little story that just kind of pulls you in. I mean, I really liked All the Light We Cannot See. There were people, it was on social media, like over the summer, people were fighting about who got galleys or manuscripts of this book. It was crazy. And even in our store, like we got one, and that was an unpleasant week where it was like, who's going to get it and how long do they get to have it? So, I had to
galley
wait.
fights.
Yeah, I had to make a spreadsheet for that, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And then one that came out earlier this year, a little bit early, which thankfully I have just managed to get more copies of, because I don't think they're going to be able to print anymore, is this book, Side Country, which is a collection of essays about people who have kind of gone to the extreme in the sporting world, climbing, fishing, hunting, you name it. Just riveting, just riveting stories. And I told you earlier about our event with Krakauer, very reminiscent of some of the stories that Krakauer wrote for magazines presented in book form here. The author is John Branch. So those three for sure I can recommend right off the bat.
Fabulous. The links are all in the chat for the audience. Adib, sell some books.
So one of the books that I encourage people to pre-order right now, because it's not out yet, but it's a Christmas picture book called Santa in the City. It's by Tiffany D. Jackson, who readers may know from her young adult novels like Grown or White Smoke. She normally writes like really intense, like thrillers, or just like hard-hitting contemporary with like a twist where she just really stabs you in the gut with the twists. But this is like a picture book about Christmas, and it's adorable. I'm really excited for it. Justina Ireland's Ophi's Ghosts is Justina's middle grade debut, and it's just beautiful and lyrical, and I can't quite reach my copy of it. It's out of reach right now, so I don't want anyone to see the back of my head because there's no hair there. I'm just joking. Everyone can tell. But I'm really excited about that. One of my favorite books of the year. I really love the graphic novel The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen. It's a story about a young Vietnamese American who mostly speaks English while his parents mostly speak Vietnamese, but they communicate through telling each other stories as he's grappling with his queerness, and it's just a lovely, lovely book. I've also been reading a lot of adult romance lately. It was kind of, for a while in like 2020 and early 2021, I was really struggling to finish any book whatsoever. And a friend was like, why don't you read some like romances? Because you know it's going to be happy. You know, people are going to be nice to each other for the most part until they have their obligatory fight and then reconcile. And I was like, you know what? I do need to just read a bunch of books with happy endings. And so I really liked Helen Huang's novels. The most recent of which was The Heart Principle. And it was a lovely romance, but also a really deep look, in particular at, you know, being a middle-aged person, having to care for like your parents in their old age and with health problems. And it ended up being kind of a sucker punch to me as well, because it brought up a lot of like my own struggles with caring for aging family members or ill family members. And kind of the terrible beauty of that, and the grace that we're lucky enough to sometimes get or give. So I really loved that recently. And of course, I cannot shout about the Murderbot Diaries often enough. There's 6 of them. There's another novella on the way soon, I think. And I can't wait. Those are like one of my favorite things, just of all time.
Those are great. And Adib, we're running low on time, but I do. You're making me think of another question I really want to ask you.
Okay.
Which is, do you ever think about writing outside of children's and YA? I mean, you're talking about sort of finding, you know, emotionally connecting and finding inspiration with romance novels and sort of other genres, other audiences. What do you think? I mean, do you think that young people are simply your audience and that's always who you're going to write for? Or can we expect an Adib Khorram, you know, romance novel or thriller or something like that sort of down the line?
I think for me, being a children's author is always going to be part of my calling. And I don't see myself ever stopping writing for children. But I would like to write for other spaces as well. There's a cat. I love other people's cats.
It's inevitable.
It's my favorite.
I do rescues, so there's 5 in the house right now.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I mean, if I have the right story and if I am able to tell it well, I would very much like to explore other categories and other genres. I think so much of being a writer is sometimes just following the weird and twisting pathways of your subconscious. And so I never say never, and I actually really would like to expand a little more, because the funny thing about writing for kids is that kids grow up, and if you're lucky, maybe they'll check out your adult books too.
And they will, and that absolutely is something. If you feel it, you should follow it. Of course, your agent will say write anything because I can sell it, but you should, because that's exactly what happens. Is you know, a successful middle reader author, they're you know, they'll age up, and you can follow that audience if you want to. I
certainly hope so. It's all a matter of like coming up with a good story. Because even now that I'm a successful author, still sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll send it to my agent, and she's like, I don't think this is the one. Maybe you need to think about this a little more. It's not very, what's the word? Good. So I still have bad ideas sometimes, but hopefully some of the good ones will work out.
Everybody does, but there's no air quotes around you being a successful author. You've been very successful, and
thank you.
The audience loves you, and will absolutely, as Jeffrey says, will follow wherever the twisting currents of your unconscious take you. So we look forward to it. To the online audience, thank you for being here today or in future time if you're watching the recording. I want to remind you to go to Rainy Day Books online to pick up your holiday books now. Do not wait. Do not wait until November. Definitely do not wait until December. While you're at it, if you don't already have the Darius Great Books, pick them up. 7 Special Somethings, Adib's debut picture book, is out now. And soon we'll be able to pre-order Kiss and Tell, perhaps? Is that what
you can pre-order right now, I think.
Right now.
Yeah.
All right, right now.
Pre-order
Kiss and Tell. Do it right now and pick up anything else from Rainy Day Books.
Can I give you one final comment about the supply chain for anyone who's watching this now or is watching this in the next 2 or 3 weeks? Just as an example, Opie's Ghosts, which Adib mentioned. Right now, the largest distributor in the country, really the only distributor for independent bookstores, has 60 copies of that book. The publisher probably has a couple hundred more. And there won't be any reprints. There's no more room in the supply chain for reprints. So if there's something that you want, this is unlike any other season that bookstores have ever experienced. If there's a specific book that you're looking for, we're doing our best, all of us, to try to have it on the shelves. But don't wait. Don't if you're waiting until Thanksgiving thinking that's the time to get in the holiday spirit and go looking for things, a lot of the things that people are wanting, even some very unusual, popular, older things, classics for the season, are gone. They're gone now, and they won't be back. It's just go to an independent bookstore. If not us, go to your local independent bookstore and trust the people there to find you something wonderful. It's what we do all the time.
Absolutely. Do not wait. Final words. Do not wait. Go out and do it now. Jeffrey Jennings, Rainy Day Books. Adib Khorram, author of Darius the Great, 7 Special Somethings, Kiss and Tell. Thank you both so much for being here today and for spending time with us. We so appreciate it. It's been great talking to the two of you. To the audience, come back next week. Same time, same place. We look forward to seeing you. And until then, stay well,